BibleWorm is on hiatus for the summer. We'll be back with new narrative lectionary episodes beginning August 31st for regular listeners and August 24th for subscribers. In the meantime, we hope you'll enjoy this episode from our Creation Care series, which first aired in summer 2024.
BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and Theologian in Residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
Today, in our series on creation care, we read sections from Leviticus chapter 26, verses 3 to 22, 34 and 35, and 40 to 45. It's a text that really presses the question, what happens when we lose track of the fact that we're part of this magnificently interconnected system, and we begin to imagine that we can, or even that we must, function on our own? How does the anxious productivity of humans impact the rest of creation? And once we realize the harm we have caused, how do we move toward healing? We wish this text didn't feel as close to home as it does, but we're glad the text is here. Thanks for being with us. Hey, Bobby, how are you today?
Hey, Amy. I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. And as I was preparing for our reading today, I'm not sure that I should admit this, but I'm going to. I read through the text. So we're reading Leviticus 26.
Yeah.
We're reading a couple sections from Leviticus 26 today. And as I was reading through it, I was like, is this the right text? Like, do I have these verses correct? And I had to work a little bit harder than usual, I think, to see the connections that I ultimately saw with creation care. But this was the exciting thing. Back when we first started this series, I was talking about the scholar Ellen Davis and how she said that she eventually realized over the course of her study that you can talk about the land and the natural world as a character in almost any part of the canon. It's always there.
Yeah.
You don't actually have to pick and choose. So I know that we did pick and choose, but also it was really powerful for me to have a text where it wasn't like immediately in my face, this text is about creation or this text is about the land or the animals, but to sort of slowly realize the way that the text is just like seeped in that.
Yeah, this is not one of the sort of typical creation stories of the Hebrew Bible. This is, we don't get a story of creation, like the act of creation here at all, which is sometimes how you think about creation texts. This is sort of creation care. And this text comes out of that sort of the care issue related to creation as much as anything. So, I think it's to me, this is one of the most interesting pieces. We'll see what we think after we record today and if it turns out to have been interesting or not. But this was one of the texts that I've been excited about since we put this series together because it's thinking about the way human beings relate to the creation and what the ethical implications of that are and how that might play out. And I think it has a lot of connection to some of the themes going on in our own time about environmental devastation and things such as that.
Yes. Those were maybe a little further in the background for some of our other texts. And
exactly.
This week they're much more front and center.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On the Spirit and Truth side with this joint series, this week they're talking about care for land animals and other people. And so we're kind of, we're extrapolating from that care for other people a little bit. We talked about land animals last week with Psalm 104. This week, we're kind of thinking about the way we relate to the environment and the implications that has for human communities. That's kind of how I see this fitting in with their series.
Yeah, I am excited to see how this fits in. And, I have this association with this text sometimes this text is referred to in the Jewish community as like the blessings and the curses.
Yeah.
Like, if you do good, here are all your blessings. And if you do bad, here are all your curses. The text does not use language like that. Like, it's really sort of a shorthand. But reading it through this new lens, I think I don't know. I'm excited to read with you. I think that's all I wanted to say with that lengthy introduction.
Yeah.
That it's been fun to read it in this context, and I want to hear what you think.
Yes. It's so funny to me when you're talking about like, oh yeah, in my community, like this Leviticus 26 text is known as, and then you have like this whole story of like how Leviticus 26 enters into your community.
How is it known in your community, Bobby?
I'm like, I'm pretty sure most people in my community have probably never read Leviticus 26. Maybe Leviticus at all. You know, like we like the narratives in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah, it's just a different division, but we do get to grapple with this one.
Indeed.
So, Bobby, our reading today we mentioned is Leviticus 26. We're not going to read the entire chapter. We're reading verses 3 through 22, 34 and 35, and then 40 to 45.
Yes.
We have been in the Psalms for a couple of weeks now and are back in the Torah, back in the books of Moses. Is there any kind of context, grounding you want to lay for us here?
I always struggle a little bit when we talk about context and background for Leviticus, but really for any of the books of the Torah about how do we want to talk about that? We could talk about it narratively. We could talk about it historically. Mm-hmm. We could talk about it in terms of sources and, you know, what does the book of Leviticus consist? And those are all really interesting conversations.
Yeah.
In the narrative context of the flow of the Torah, the Pentateuch, we are really just not less than a year removed from the Exodus from Egypt. So the Israelites enslaved in Egypt for 400 some years. They escape across the Red Sea. They go to Sinai, where they arrive on Pentecost, as we talked about a few weeks ago. And then they stay there for a year. And the book of Leviticus, in the narrative of the text anyway, is given on Sinai as part of God's covenant with Israel to Moses. And this book is sort of given to a community that has just escaped from economic oppression in Egypt, is headed toward a promised land where they're going to make a new kind of society that is different from the kind of society that Pharaoh had created for them. And we get a book of instruction. The instruction covers all kinds of territory, from sacrifices to ritual purity to ethical commandments. Maybe, I mean, one of my favorite texts of all the Bible is Leviticus 25, just one chapter before this, which might be relevant to our conversation today, about the Jubilee year, in which, well, there's a sabbatical year in which the land is allowed to rest for a year every 7 years. And then there's the Jubilee year in which all Israelites are forgiven their debts and allowed to return to their homeland every 7 sevens, every 50th year. And then our text follows right along after that. So I don't know if we want to be more specific than that. Are there things you were thinking or hoping I might say about the background of Leviticus?
I think that's really helpful. And as you said, there's a million things one could say. The only thing I might add is that we have sort of just come to the end of what is known as the Holiness Code, which is, you know, one of the big sections of law.
Right.
And I mention that just because as we start reading, it's going to refer to my laws and my commandments. And so one of the questions that I will ask you is, which ones? What are we talking about? Yeah. So, yeah, we have just sort of wrapped that section. And then this is, you know, sort of the conclusion of that. Like, if you'll do all that stuff, this is what it'll be like for you. And if you don't do it, this is what it'll be like for you.
When you talk about the Holiness Code, you're thinking about Leviticus 17 to 25, with 1 to 16 being the sort of priestly code. Is that how you're thinking?
Yes, that's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. The Holiness. Is there anything you want to say about the Holiness Code? Holiness Code?
This might be more sort of in the weeds than we our listeners need to make sense of this text in the world of creation care. But I'll say this at least. I think a lot of people reading Leviticus, it just sort of all mushes together after a certain point. There is a lot of talk about ritual and holiness and some laws that make a lot of sense to us now and some laws that really don't make a lot of sense to us now. If you get really into the weeds a bit, you can distinguish between two different schools of thought within the book. One of them seems to be responsible for the first 16 chapters, and then one of them for, as you said, chapters 17 to 25, the Holiness Code, which is really oriented towards the idea of what does it mean to be holy. And it keeps repeating this refrain, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord, am holy.
Right.
And so that thus it gets that name.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's all I would want to say about the Holiness Code at this point. Do you want to add anything else?
No, I think that's exactly right.
That's good for now.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive in and see what this text has to say to us in our mindset of creation care. We are in Leviticus 26, and we are picking up in verse 3, and I am reading from the NJPS. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant your rains in their season, so that the earth shall yield its produce and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land, and you shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land. You shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000. Your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you, and I will maintain my covenant with you. You shall eat old grain long stored, and you shall have to clear out the old to make room for the new. I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out from the land of the Egyptians to be their slaves no more, who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I've already mentioned to you what I think my first question is, but when this starts off, if you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, does anything in particular come to mind to you that they're referring to? How do you understand that?
No, that's an important question, Amy. And to me, I'm not sure that it's 100% obvious. If you back up to verse 2, you must keep my Sabbaths and respect my sanctuary. I am the Lord. And we're going to see that Sabbath becomes important through this text. And so I think at least that is kind of in mind.
Mm-hmm.
My head wants to go to a couple places. One is just the Decalogue, to say that this idea of respecting the sanctuary, keeping the Sabbath, like these are part of the 10 Commandments. And so maybe we've got that in mind, sort of extrapolated.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit what I was talking about earlier in the introduction, too, was Leviticus 25 is the text that comes immediately before this, and it has that provision of leaving the land fallow every 7th year, forgiving the debts of fellow Israelites every 50th year, and making sure, reminding the Israelites that the land does not belong to them, but that it belongs to God, and therefore that it needs to be tended properly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of have this mixture in my head of those things, like generally the kinds of things that God has been saying since they arrived at Sinai back in Exodus, maybe specifically these kind of, I mean, this might just be who I am as a human being too, these kind of provisions about how do we treat the land, how do we treat our neighbor, how do we responsibly conduct economics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What does that look like from your perspective?
I really appreciate the way that you're helping me to sort of, I think I'm so sort of in creation care mode now that I'm thinking about a little bit differently, which I will tell you about in a minute. But I really appreciate the way that you are intentionally like weaving us back into the totality of what has been put before the Israelites as this is the covenant, this is the deal. And it is not just to care for the earth.
Right.
It's a lot of things. And they are sort of all intertwined in different ways that we'll see in this text. I think that this particular time reading the text, those words struck me as very holistic. And like I just have this idea in my mind, at the front of my mind, that the laws and the commandments, just like the whole way that creation is set up, are not arbitrary.
Yes.
Even if you don't understand them.
Yes.
You might understand them and they might make good sense to you and you might agree with them, but you might not understand them. And I feel like it's an invitation to say, like, there is a big picture, there is a system that is magnificent in its artistry, and you just have to believe that it is and take your place within the system. The system of creation and the system of the laws and commandments that God has laid out in terms of how the different parts of society should relate to each other.
I 100% agree with that. I love the way that you said that. And, some of the imagery in this text, as we'll talk about, is familiar from some of the texts that we've been reading about the rain and the grain and the you're going to have so much harvest that the next harvest is coming before you finish the last one.
Right.
But then, and so we've been reading those in the previous weeks as they're like, this is just the way the world is. And here we get a stronger sense of this is the way the world is if you respect it as such.
Yes.
We got to that theme a little bit in the Psalm 65 text, like be quiet and listen, and then these things will happen to you. Here it's going to be fully on the table. And, that last line in the section that you read, all of these things, I brought you out of Egypt. To me, as a reminder, like they have been living in a place for 400 years that did not think of the world this way, right? Or at least my sort of stereotyped version of what Pharaoh was like in the biblical text, that was all about economic exploitation. And so they don't know how to think like this any longer. And so for God to say, no, look, the world, the way that it's been given to you is not the world, the way that it was created. Here's what it's supposed to be like. But in order to do that, you've got to live this way, which is not the way Pharaoh has lived.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. They have been brought up in a different worldview.
Yeah.
Where they had very little power, but still you are swimming in it. Like that's,
Yeah.
So let's touch on a couple of the sort of specifics that come up within this. So it starts with, rains in their season and the produce of the earth and the trees. Is there anything in particular that strikes you in that paragraph that you want to comment on?
I mean, to me, that little section reminds me a lot of the things that we've been reading the last few weeks.
Yeah.
That there is rain that comes and produces abundantly, and it comes in the right time. And there is a seasonality to things that is regular and one should expect, and that's the way that creation is made.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the rain will come, the land will produce. Like it's just this sort of like, yeah, this is just the way that it is. Like it's designed this way. But that all of that begins with the if you live.
Right.
And so there's like this, the world is created this way, but it has a contingency, which is that you could live some other way, and in which case this whole thing's going to get thrown off.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I like the way that it's like it's if you do what you're supposed to do, the earth will do what it does, and the trees will do what they do, and it all works together, Everyone will do their thing.
I really love that image. I don't quite know why, but the threshing season lasts till the grape harvest lasts till planting time. there's no season of anxiety
Yeah.
where you're like, is this stuff in my storehouse enough to get me through to the next thing? It's even yet while I'm still gleaning the field, here comes the next thing behind
Here
it.
comes the next thing. Yeah.
I'm not a farmer. I don't live in that agrarian cycle, but to me, that just feels so lovely. I don't know what the parallel is for me. Like maybe, am I going to have enough money in retirement or something? I don't know quite exactly.
No, I think that I like that you use the word anxiety there, because I think that sense of abundance is real and important. And, we'll see it again. We can skip down now to look at verse 10. You shall eat old grain, which sounds like such a funny blessing.
Yeah. The previous year's harvest is how the CEB has it, which sounds a little better than old grain.
It sounds a little more appealing. Yeah, not last year's matzah, But yeah, this idea that you'll have, you're not living paycheck to paycheck or, harvest day to harvest day. There is so much more than enough that you have all this storehouse of it. Yes. You don't have any of the anxiety. Bobby, it made me think back in almost like maybe nostalgic is the wrong word because I didn't actually live through this, but thinking about the story of the manna and how you can't save manna. You can't take any extra. And I think knowing where the place that our society has come to now in terms of our desire to amass extra and extra and extra of things, I both see how, yes, of course, it allays anxiety to be able to do that. And I can understand how it can be confusing to us humans when we can do that. Then, I don't know, we think that we have more control or responsibility than maybe we ought to.
So, one of the provisions, you're asking what the statutes and laws are, and one of them is back in Leviticus 19, which says not to glean your field all the way to the edges to make sure that other people also have enough. And the way to make sure that you don't have to be anxious is to take everything you've got in your field and store it up in your grain storage for next year. And that's the way we are oriented, I think, as a society. And maybe that's the fact that Leviticus had to say don't do it that way. Maybe suggest that's just the way humans are. This is saying if you share, if you forgive debt, if you let people return to their land, there will yet still be enough because the earth produces enough out of God's blessing. So you can have the anxiety alleviated, not because of our capacity to store up for times of anxiety, but because of a promise of God's goodness that continues on year after year after year.
Oh, I like that a lot, reading this specifically in the context of those things that came in the chapter prior. And other things too, but that sort of require us to see ourselves as part of a system and that the system cares for itself. It's just so easy to extract ourselves from the system.
Absolutely
but
it is.
I guess that's exactly what this text is telling us we cannot do.
Yes.
Cannot do that. Yeah, I was thinking a similar thing in this last part that God says, I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. And I was thinking, yes, of course. And it's describing this at least moment in the history of Israel, sort of imagining into the future, I guess, when they'll have land and be growing crops and whatnot, that God is everywhere and yet not necessarily doing these, miracles that fall outside of nature or, giving you manna every day. Like the world has been created and the land and the trees do their things and you will work the land and store the grain and you won't need to be rescued because there will be peace. And so the different ways that God has been really very clearly present it's like the system is designed so that it's just an everyday thing. And so it can be harder for us to see.
Yes.
But this is a real insistence that's like, no, but I'm there.
Yeah.
I am precisely there.
The place where I think about this mostly is whenever we talk about the book of Deuteronomy, And we talk about how it's sort of set at that transition from wilderness to the land flowing with milk and honey, and that God is sort of making your point just there, that it's easy to see God when you're in the wilderness and you rely on God every day. It's harder when you're in abundance. I think this Leviticus text is doing something quite similar, as you're saying, that it's going to appear as though the earth is just fertile because the earth is fertile, but in fact, the earth is fertile because of God's presence and God's blessing.
Yeah.
One of the places I get a little hung up in this framing of it is, so I'm all about, like, God has told us how to live with our neighbor, and therefore we live with our neighbor in these ways, and it turns out that there is plenty. I get a little more hung up, like a whole bunch of the law, and verse 2, which comes right before our reading, is about respecting the sanctuary. Verse 1 is about worshiping God and not setting up idols. So there is this sense in which what this text is saying is, if you worship the God of Israel, your land will be plentiful, but if you don't, it won't. I think I struggle a little more with that religious, like the ethical implications of being religious. Yeah, the religious implications unto themselves, I struggle a little bit more.
Yeah.
Can you help me with that?
No. That is, for me, that is usually in most years, that is what is really difficult about this section of text to me, is that it feels very oriented towards exactly what you're saying. I am trying to see it this year as God is representative of this whole intricate, beautiful, crazy system that has been set up, where everything is interdependent and interconnected in ways that we still, I believe, do not understand. And that I don't know that this is exactly what the text is asking us to do, but the way that I am hearing it right now is to be willing to take on some humility, put aside the idols, which I would describe as the things that I can, like, see and touch, and that I can see the results of them.
Yes.
And say, like, I believe in the world, that I believe that God created the world in a particular way, and I don't know all the details of that, and I am willing to follow these laws and commandments. I'm willing to do it, even though it might not be convenient at every time, or it might not feel in this moment like it's in my best interest, because the world is bigger than I can understand.
I love that.
But I really understand what you're saying, and it is easy to read this text that way, I think.
And that's super helpful. I appreciate it.
Is there anything else you want to pull out of this first section before we move on?
I'll tell you that the part that I have the most trouble sort of thinking about is verse 6 to 8, which is about, having peace with your enemies, and your enemies being kind of scaredy pants who run away when there's just a few of you.
Yeah.
Do you have a way of thinking about that in terms of, like, within the framework of this thing about rain and food and harvest and security?
Well, I will tell you, verse 6 reminded me of a text we read earlier this season that was one of the Psalms that was talking about sort of the alternation of humans being up and about during the day, and then wild beasts being up and about in the night. And they need their space for hunting, and we need to not be in their way, and they need to not be attacking us. And so this sort of, like, the world is big enough for both if people are really not taking up more space than they ought to. I'm not totally sure how that fits, honestly, with giving chase to your enemies, where you are perceived as more powerful, and so your enemies just get out of your way. I don't know.
I don't know how to settle it either. The one sort of insight that I have that I can't quite land is just about how the anxiety that we were talking about earlier about food and water and plenty is the source of a lot of animosity that people have against other people.
Yes.
And so if you could imagine your way into a world in which there was clearly plenty, then these sorts of struggle over resources wouldn't be necessary because we would live in such a way in which there were resources to be shared. That doesn't translate, like, I have moved away from the text a bit because here in the text we're chasing our enemies around.
Yes, right.
And maybe we can envision a world in which nobody has to chase anybody unless they're just like playing freeze tag or whatever.
Right. Right.
But at least we sort of like this connection of resources and anxiety and how that causes human strife, I think is worth
and imagining a
reflecting on.
world in which you do not have to be afraid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Amy, there's a big butt coming in 14.
Oh, yeah, there is. I thought you meant the other kind of butt.
I know. I just like, anyway. I have jokes, but they're not very good.
Just yesterday, I was reading, which Psalm? I think it was 35. And it has this line that's like, it's a lament. And it's like, I am the particular butt of my neighbors. And I just laughed for like 10 minutes.
The particular butt of my neighbors?
I am the particular butt.
That is amazing. I
I
don't even know quite what that means.
It's that you're the buttiest butt of your of your neighbors. Who are you the particular butt of? Okay, we'll discuss that later.
Yes.
Hi everyone, it's Bobby here from BibleWorm. We hope you're enjoying the podcast. Amy and I started BibleWorm a couple of years ago because we wanted to create a space where we could talk deeply about the Bible in ways that bring together our academic backgrounds in biblical studies and our deep engagement with communities and people of faith. We decided to make this resource free because we want everyone to have access to sound biblical scholarship that connects biblical faith to everyday life. We hope you're finding the podcast fits that need. That said, while the podcast is free, making it is not. Amy and I and the rest of Team BibleWorm spend a lot of time and energy studying, recording, and editing the podcast to make it freely available to the public. If you enjoyed the podcast, and if you find yourself in a position to support our work, we hope that you will consider becoming a BibleWorm supporter for as little as $4 per month. For a bit more, you can also get early access to episodes, weekly liturgies, video Bible studies, join a monthly discussion group, and more. We realize not everyone is in a position to support the podcast, but if you appreciate our work and want to support us, we hope you'll check out our Patreon at patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for more details. Thanks so much for listening, and now back to this week's podcast.
Okay, picking up in verse 14. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules so that you do not observe all my commandments and you break my covenant, I in turn will do this to you. I will wreak misery upon you, consumption and fever, which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you. You shall be routed by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you. You shall flee, though none pursues. And if for all that you do not obey me, I will go on to discipline you sevenfold for your sins, and I will break your proud glory. I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper, so that your strength shall be spent to no purpose. Your land shall not yield its produce, nor shall the trees of the land yield their fruit. And if you remain hostile toward me and refuse to obey me, I will go on smiting you sevenfold for your sins. I will loose wild beasts against you, and they shall bereave you of your children and wipe out your cattle. They shall decimate you, and your roads shall be deserted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big butt.
That was a big old butt. Particular butt.
It was the particular butt. Okay, so here we have a series of disasters of different kinds that are being threatened. That it seems like the threats are meant to motivate a change in behavior, not just to say like you're punished because you were bad and it's a punishment. It's like each one is like I'll do this. And then if you still won't, it's
Yeah.
trying to motivate better behavior, but they're still pretty intense. But they don't seem random to me. They don't seem like random bad things. And I'm curious how you see the progression of things that are threatened here. So in the beginning, let's see, we get some diseases, misery, and illness on your body.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 lines in this first section that really stood out to me. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemy shall eat it. And then you shall flee, though none pursues.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if they tie together around like the idea of futility. And, I was talking a lot in the first section about how one of the dangers would be that you would start to be able to overlook God and think that you actually have more control in this system than you do.
Right.
And this is really, that's pretty pointedly showing you that that's not true.
No, I think that's exactly right, Amy. You made the point a minute ago that this is not God sort of, then I will punish you in ways X, Y, and Z. This is, I'm trying to get your attention so that you will live according to these statutes that I have given you, which tell you how creation works and how to live in it in abundant ways. But you won't do that. And so here's what's going to happen to you. And so I had not been thinking about it as a progression, but you're right. And this issue of you plant and somebody else eats it and you're always anxious.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way you're thinking about it makes so much sense to me, that when we think that we are the masters of the creation and we can make it do what we want, and we own the produce of the land and we own the land, which Leviticus says we do not, then we start to have this sort of anxiousness, and we do start to fight about resources like we were talking about before. And even if we're not actually being conquered by our enemies, we're constantly afraid what's going to happen when. And so we build up our military and we, arm space, and we do these kinds of things to protect our natural resources, even if no one is actively trying to get them at the moment. And so, this just all rings true to me, that once we start to think that we're in control of everything, then we become anxious about our capacity to control.
Yeah.
And so letting that sense of control go and trusting in God and the provision that God has offered seems right. I was really struck by the line before that about wasting diseases and fevers, because to me, this is something that we're seeing now. Just coming out of COVID, and which has just happened, we were already doing BibleWorm. I remember when we were recording BibleWorm right when COVID started. And that was such an inconceivable thing to me at the time. And now it just seems like, well, of course there are pandemics and there are these diseases, and that's going to keep happening. And so this kind of the connection of all of these things, if you can't recognize that you're not in control, if you can't live as though, creation is plentiful, then here's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to read this without thinking, yes, this is exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
Even right now.
And in a way, I don't know what this says about my worldview, but as you were saying before, it can be difficult to read this section without seeing it as being God-centered in a way that's not so helpful to me, like saying you must worship me, and if you don't worship me, I will make you sick.
Right.
But I think the very fact that we see this unfolding in different ways in the world, I'm just seeing the connections differently than if I were reading this text just sort of disconnected from life around this, that I don't know if I would exactly say it's like a natural consequence, but in some ways, we have pushed the system beyond the limits of what the system can bear, and it is falling apart. Mm-hmm. And we are feeling more anxious despite whatever we're trying to do to control things. Yeah.
On that issue, it's really helpful to me to think about this. Like we talked narratively about how they've just been out of Egypt for a matter of months. We get this reframing several times here, but just right before this section about you're not Egypt's slaves anymore. So when we talk about this worship me or pay attention to my statutes, to me, we're being almost given an either or. And the either or is follow God in the way God has given us, or follow Pharaoh and the acquisitiveness of Pharaoh. It's not about like the diversity of world religions and like which ones are right and wrong.
I absolutely agree. Yes. Yeah.
So when you read it that way, then it's like, okay, yeah, we have a choice to make, one or the other. And if you choose the Pharaoh way, if you choose the accumulation way, here's what's going to happen. That language in verse 16 is, I will do the following to you, or at least in the CEB. And so there is a sense in which God is being active here. But you can very much read this as these are the natural consequences that are going to play out if you follow this acquisitive model. And I don't quite know what to do with the agency of God there, how active a role God is taking. But God has certainly set up a world that works in one kind of way. And this seems to be saying that God's not going to keep like filling the gap. If we keep not listening, God's not just going to say, well, okay, but I'll make it work anyway. There is like a way that it's supposed to go.
So then the text moves us from this kind of sort of anxiety and breakdown in the system to what I think is such a beautiful and also excruciating image that the sky becomes like iron and the earth like copper. You know, we started the last section saying that like if you're living within the system that God has made for you, the earth will do its thing and the plants will do their thing, and it's all it'll all be fine. And here I particularly love the artistry that like they've chosen a grayish metal for the sky and a brownish metal for the earth, but they become inert.
Yes.
Like the life is gone from them.
Inert and impenetrable.
Yes.
It reminded me a little bit of that line in Psalm 65 that was about the early fall rain, like softening the ground so you could till it.
Yes.
Here you've got the sky is ironed over and the ground is so hard that it's bronze. And so you can't even imagine that sort of softening taking place.
Yeah. I mean, whereas before you sow your seed to no purpose because the enemies have taken it.
Yeah.
Now the earth itself cannot produce.
Right.
Which to me feels scarier, I guess.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, here to me is one of the places where the sort of, we've been talking a lot about economics, but now we're starting to get into creation itself is affected by the decisions that we make.
Yes.
Which is absolutely true. And so the fact that we have not listened now results in a change in the environment precisely so. The sky is different. The earth is different. I appreciate the way you said that. It's not just about anxious enemies are stealing your stuff, but we have initiated a change in the way the world itself works.
And then what do you pull out of the last section of this, Bobby, about the wild beasts? Loosing the wild beasts against you who will bereave you of your children and wipe out your cattle.
Yeah, this is where I start to think about Psalm 104, which you were referring to a minute ago, but about the daytime is for people, the nighttime is for animals, and everybody's kids are happy. Here, once the rules are no longer being followed by humans, that sort of breakdown of appropriate places falls apart. And so now there's wild animals that are out when people are out and out of their normal habitation. Like you got a coyote in your backyard, for instance.
Yeah.
Like things like that are happening, and the results of human activity or human refusal to be constrained according to the laws set forth in the Torah result in this world in which human space, human time, animal space, and animal time get all mixed up. And it's bad for everybody, right? It's bad for humans here, but it's also bad for the animals.
Yes.
And so the natural order of things has fallen apart.
Yeah.
It's really bad, though. They will make you so few in number that your roads will seem deserted. Like, this is like full-on animal attack.
No, it's really bad. And the other thing that strikes me is it's not like from a place of malice. Like, these are wild beasts. This is what wild beasts do. And the system was created in a way that there were natural boundaries. And so the wild beasts could be beastie and we could do our thing. But this is not an evil force in the world. This is just when no one's respecting when we're not respecting the boundaries and we're not upholding the system as it was designed, this is what happens. There is real danger in the world that, we need to be respectful of, almost like we need to take seriously.
That's so important, Amy. I was not going to put that together for myself, but that's really important. The wild animals they're just wild.
Yeah.
They're only dangerous when these sort of boundaries are breaking down. Yeah, it's absolutely right.
Okay. We have 2 shorter sections to read in the latter part of the chapter. Are you ready to move on?
I am.
Okay. So the first one starts at verse 34. Then shall the land make up for its Sabbath years throughout the time that it is desolate, and you are in the land of your enemies. Then shall the land rest and make up for its Sabbath years. Throughout the time that it is desolate, it shall observe the rest that it did not observe in your Sabbath years while you were dwelling upon it. Okay, I think we need a little bit of context to get us from where we were to here. When? It says, then shall the land make up the Sabbath years. When is that?
I mean, so I think there's a couple of ways of reading it. One is what has happened in the middle between verses 22 and 34 is that the enemy has come and taken the people away, devastated the land, scattered you among the nations. Which
it's like exile.
I assume is reference to exile.
Kicked out of the land.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's, I think, the precise picture of what this has in mind is the exile. But if you just read it following on verse 22, it's like the lions and the bears ate so many people that there's nobody left.
That's interesting. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So, I think, and this is when we decided how to divide this chapter up for our lectionary purposes, first of all, if you just read on through there's so many curses that it gets really kind of exhausting.
Yes, it does.
And second of all, I don't really necessarily know how to think about exile from a modern context, but I do know how to think about the land becoming devastated by all of the horrible things that are happening to it because of us. And so I think it's worth sort of maybe thinking about it on both of those levels. Whatever causes the land to become desolate, this is the outcome.
Yeah.
So interesting to me that the language for the land there, the CEB has it in verse 34, the land will enjoy its Sabbath. The land will rest and enjoy.
Yeah.
So this thing that's like human destruction, then the land is like, oh my goodness, thank goodness that I get a break.
Yeah.
Just the contrast between humans and the land here is so striking. What do you do with that?
I also came away with that real sense that what is so like tragic in our own human story, it just makes me think, it brings me back again to like the interconnection of everything and that everything is somewhat in sync. But when we are pushing too hard on the system and taking too much, we're taking it from something else in the system. So removing us from the land means that we can no longer abuse the system on the land. You mentioned before for us that the Sabbath of the land, but just to make sure that people have the context that they need here, so that what we are supposed to be doing here is that every 7 years, a plot of land that might be used to grow crops is left fallow, and anything that grows on the land is fine. But you can't like try to plant things or try to, increase the produce or do anything like that. And that is a really difficult thing to do. I mean, it is difficult in the systems that we have to trust that there is going to be enough food if you are not actively trying to get food out of that land.
Yeah.
And when you do that, the land can replenish itself. I mean, it sounds a little funny, not funny, I don't know. Maybe like it could be a case of anthropomorphizing to say the land needs to rest, but actually the land needs to rest.
Yeah.
And there was some kind of understanding of that in the biblical text.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not something that we do very much. I mean, the most we might do now is rotate crops, but we really don't just let land sit fallow.
No. That land, the sabbatical year, the land resting is in 25, 1-7, if people are looking for that. You asked me at the very beginning, what are the rules and commands or the statutes that we're talking about? Mm-hmm. And the one that keeps coming up over and over again is this Sabbath, whether human Sabbath or here the sabbatical year for the land. And it's reminding me of a surprising thing that you said to me in Genesis 1 text, which was about the first day human beings were alive on the earth was a Sabbath day. We were created on the afternoon of the 6th day, so that the first thing we experienced was the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is the core, the essence of everything. And that has blown my mind. But it also has reminded me of these conversations you and I feel like we talk about Sabbath as we should, but we talk about it every special series that we do. And there was that whole conversation in the economics series about Sabbath is a break from the economic anxiety of Pharaoh. You cannot be productive 7 days a week. You cannot make your land be productive 7 years in a row. Mm-hmm. You just have to rest. Let the land rest and trust. Rest and trust. Mm-hmm. And so it comes back again here. And the sense is we work the land, we work the land, we work the land. The land is exhausted. It can no longer produce. And so it's the anxiousness about productivity that causes us to exploit creation. And then we were last, I can't remember if it was Psalm 104 or Psalm 65 or both of them, but we were talking about humans and the earth as like siblings and like, we're like the water and look how close we are. And here we're enemies, right? It's like the earth is like, oh my goodness, thank you for getting rid of those people so that I can have the rest that I need. And so it's just the alienation that has happened here. And it's all about not observing Sabbath. It's all about not resting and reminding ourselves that God is God and we are not. That leads to all of this, it seems.
Yeah. Bobby, that's making me think too, like we've been talking a lot in this series about natural boundaries between things. And it seems like by removing the humans from the land, either by having them eaten by wild beasts or having them sent into exile or whatever it is, there wasn't meant to be a boundary there. Like that was meant, we were precisely meant to be in the world helping food to grow from the land and being in relationship with the land, but we couldn't do it. And so now there has to be a boundary. Now the land has to be without people and it's relieved, but it doesn't have the people.
Right.
Which is, I don't know, maybe a little sad. Not sad in the context of we were exploiting it, but not exactly the way it was meant to be.
Right.
And we have to be somewhere else or in the belly of a wild beast.
Yeah. And it's because we couldn't follow those rules that were given to us about how to live in harmony with created order.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to bring up from here, or shall we do our last little section?
Let's do our last little section.
Okay, then I am picking up in verse 40. They shall confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers, in that they trespassed against me, yea, were hostile to me. When I in turn have been hostile to them and have removed them into the land of their enemies, then at last shall their obdurate heart humble itself, and they shall atone for their iniquity. Then will I remember my covenant with Jacob. I will remember also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. For the land shall be forsaken of them, making up for its Sabbath years by being desolate of them, while they atone for their iniquity. for the abundant reason that they rejected my rules and spurned my laws. Yet even then, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them or spurn them so as to destroy them, annulling my covenant with them. For I, the Lord, am their God. I will remember in their favor the covenant with the ancients, whom I freed from the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations to be their God. I, the Lord. Well, hope is not totally lost.
No, hope is not lost.
Hope is not lost.
God has a memory.
God has a memory, yeah. And the first step is so often the case, is that we have to realize what we have done. Yes. And what our ancestors, our fathers have done, that
yes.
we did a thing.
Yes.
And, I have always read confess here as having some kind of like religious significance in I don't even know. Somehow the language has felt outside of the everyday world to me. But right now reading it, it's just like, you have to own it. You did this. And you have to be willing to own that, to be humble enough.
Yeah.
Bobby, I'm so curious what you make of verse 42, where God is remembering things. I'm curious first about if you have any thoughts about the order of the patriarchs who are listed there, and then about the inclusion at the end of the land.
Well, I did not have thoughts about that until you asked that way.
But now you do.
But that was such that profound question has led me to insights that are kind of blowing my mind a little bit. But so here's what your question has led me to, and I don't know if this is what you were thinking or not. First of all, I wanted to notice that in verse 40, they confess their and their ancestors' guilt. So there you have, I really appreciate what you were saying about we have to acknowledge that we ourselves have mistreated creation in certain kinds of ways. And we have to acknowledge that those who came before us did so as well.
Yes.
Then, so this leads me to what I saw with your question, which is there, again, it's in reverse order to the more originary covenant. So Jacob, and then his father Isaac, and then his father Abraham. If you read it in that way, so these are the three foundational covenants with Israel, of course. Then when you put the land before that, then this implication there is that God had sort of a prior covenant with the land, which existed long and well before those covenants were in effect, which is kind of how we've seen it in Job 38 especially, but in our other texts as well, that God had an ongoing relationship with creation prior to even the existence of humankind, let alone to any covenants with humankind. And so God's primary commitment maybe, or I don't know if primary, but originary commitment maybe to the land itself.
Yeah.
Are those the lines you were thinking along?
Yes, those are the lines I was thinking along, and I don't have some kind of secret insight to offer, but I do think it's really interesting that it walks us backwards. That's not usually the order in which that patriarchs are given.
No, it's not.
And I'm just so moved that it ends with, I will remember the land. Because whatever the resolution to this is going to be, it is not going to be just between God and the people.
Yes, that is so important. And you could almost read that previous section we were talking about as God protecting the land from the people.
Yes.
And so then the hope is a restoration of that relationship between humankind and the land or the earth, in which all of it can thrive again together.
Which again was the way it was meant to be. Humans were supposed to be in relationship to the land, not pushed out of the land because they can't control themselves. But yeah, this is God will remember the covenant with us, but not to the exclusion of everything else.
Yes. And then you end up in the end there with not breaking my covenant because I am the Lord their God in order to be their God. So there's the relationship. Now it's a three-way relationship of humankind, the earth, and God. And so all three of those relationships matter, are fundamental, and were the way that it was set up to be in the first place.
Yeah. this might be kind of a weird question, but I'll ask it anyway. In the end, what do you think is being promised? Maybe promised is the wrong word. But it doesn't say, I will restore all your stuff and make everything go back to the way it was. And
The CEB has it, I will not reject them or despise them to the point of totally destroying them.
yeah.
Which is a fairly still concerning thing to say, right?
Baby steps.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about this in various contexts from time to time about, we have built up a whole world that is exactly about anxious economic productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't simply keep that world the way that it is and return to these relationships. So I think there has to be a sense of loss and a sense that things have been disrupted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this text a little bit is saying things are going to be kind of ugly for a while,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the case that is going to end in your annihilation. It's the case that there is something on the other side, but we've got to go through what we've got to go through in order to get there.
Yeah.
I don't love it. I wish it was just repent and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
But I think it's more realistic. And, if we were to repent now of the things that we have been doing to the environment for generations, it would take the environment time to recover. And there's going to be destruction in the meantime.
Yes.
So I think this is a realistic view.
Yeah.
Even if maybe not my preferred. I want to be more Pollyanna about it, I think, but this text does not invite that.
Yeah, it's promising some kind of relationship. God is not going to hide God's face from us. God will be in relationship with us, and we will be in it together.
Yeah.
And that's a whole lot better than being in it alone.
Yes. The one covenant that we haven't really mentioned is the one that's in verse 45, which is sort of at the culmination of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I will remember the covenant with the first generation, the ones I brought out of Egypt's land in the sight of all the nations. There's just so much about that that's interesting. But I mean, one is that's one of the covenants to be remembered, which is later than all the other covenants that we've talked about. And then it's called the covenant with the first generation. Do you have, can you help me think about that?
Bobby, I love that question, and I had not thought about it before you asked it. But one of the things that I love so much about the story of the Exodus from Egypt is yes, there is a whole story of the foundation of the people Israel in the book of Genesis. And then it's sort of like the story restarts when they come out of Egypt, because the generation that comes out may or may not have even known who this God was, and they had their whole own experiences and worldview based on their experiences in Egypt, and they really are born together as this nation Israel. And it makes me wonder if there's a way to see coming out of this moment of distress in our relationship to creation, is there a possibility for a rebirth again? That, yes, we messed up all the things and we forgot all the things and we didn't know them and we did a lot of things wrong, and God hasn't forgotten us, and maybe there's a rebirth possible.
I like that a lot.
I think I'm kind of shifting us already towards closing comments with
Yeah.
that. Is there anything else you want to mention about this section, or are we ready to kind of
I feel like we've been sort of talking closing comments for a while now.
I think so.
I have had more trouble maybe with this text than any other, sort of not reading it in light of contemporary life.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't quite know where I land, other than things that we have already been talking about. But to me, the thing that this text does so nicely in my mind is sort of exposes the effects of human misalignment with the created order and the effects of that, which is the reality that we live in. And it's easy to blame it on other people. And it's easy to just think, well, this is just the way that the world is. But this text is reminding us that no, the world was actually created to work in these bountiful, beautiful, fertile ways that we've been talking about for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And human beings who have a certain way that we need to live in order for creation to thrive have not been able to do that. And, that's been given to us according to this text in the book of Leviticus and the rest of the Torah, and the ways that we treat the land and the ways that we pay respect to God and the way that we treat our neighbors. And I just think I just think it's so clearly true. This kind of, we went to Egypt, we learned about anxious productivity. We cannot separate ourselves from anxious productivity. Yeah. And that's just the way that we live our lives. And the thought of taking a Sabbath day off, or the thought of letting our means of production lie fallow for a year, like that is crazy talk in this world in which we live. And this text is saying that's the restfulness, the trust, that is what is required.
Yeah.
This comes up in the Spirit and Truth sort of collaboration as care for our neighbors. And one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about is just being a American, a Westerner, and about what that means being a citizen of a global humankind, and the kinds of choices that I and my people make that have devastating effects like this, not just for ourselves, but more so for other people who live in more vulnerable parts of the world, where it's sort of coming, the effects of environmental devastation are coming more belatedly to places where I am and to other parts of the world. The care for the world here is about recognizing the effects of the way that we live on our neighbors and committing ourselves to returning to placing God first. And like we talked about a few weeks ago, being satisfied with what God has on offer and resting and allowing the world to rest and recover. And one of the things that Walter Brueggemann says is that he's a Bible scholar, not a policy writer. And so I don't quite know what the policy is that you write, but I know what the message is here from the biblical text, which is we need to make some changes.
Yes.
And so I don't pretend that I know exactly how I should live when I wake up tomorrow, but I know that this is a matter of some urgency for people of faith to be thinking about with all of our energy and resource.
Yes. Yeah, I love that.
What about you, Amy?
You spoke so beautifully, Bobby, and I don't want to add, I think I just want to tag on one additional thought related to the connection to our neighbors, which is, as you were talking, I was thinking, not in terms of policy, but in terms of I buy it. I feel like I get what this is saying, and I believe it, and I see it in the world. And I am one person. What does that? I am one person who lives in a city who, what does this mean for me when I wake up in the morning? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that it is, in terms of our relationship to our neighbors, this is not something that individuals are going to be able to do alone. And yet it will take individuals to stick their neck out and say let's try doing this thing that's going to feel hard for a while, because we're going to have to give up some immediate comforts to do it. But I think that there is momentum possible in that, because I think a lot of us are feeling this rumbling distress because we know this, we know it, we can feel this. So if anyone listening feels that, feels that call, it is needed. It is needed. Bobby, next week is our last week of this summer series, and we will be reading Ezekiel chapter 47. Again, not a book that people often turn to when they are thinking of creation care, so I am excited to see what we'll find in there.
Yeah, me too. This has been a good conversation, Amy. I appreciate it.
It's been really helpful. Thanks, Bobby. And I will see you next time.
All right. See you then.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of BibleWorm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Next week, we'll read the very last bit of our special series on creation care, Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 1 through 12. Until then, keep on digging.